Good to see you this evening. If you'd like to have one of the outlines, raise your hand. That man in the back, be more than happy to get one to you. You know, back in the book of Psalm, the 11th chapter and verse 3, we find the statement made, if the foundations be destroyed, what then shall the righteous do? And you think about that, and you think about the value of the foundations, what things are built upon. Well, you look and you find whenever God built this world, He gave us, of course, the physical globe upon which we stand, the whole of the universe. But whenever He created mankind in His image, He set foundations. And we, of course, need to protect those foundations. We think about all the situations going on in the world right now. You know, some of the sad things that are happening, wars, rumors of wars. You know, it's just horrible what goes on. Well, that's the foundation of the civil government that has some struggles. Always has been, always will be. But then you think of the church. We're meeting here today. And we assemble. You know, many times you hear people stand up and pray about things being done unto His glory and those things that are done according to His will. And you think about the church as a foundation. God established it to show forth, as the writer in Ephesians says, the manifold wisdom of God. We are there to set forth, continue on with the word which He has given. But then you think about those two foundations and you think, well, what's happening to them at times? Why is it that struggles come into both realms? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the foundational ones is the first foundation. What God set forth as the primary, and I believe the most important foundation, that is the family. Whenever you find He created man in His image, He, first of all, you know, the first time He said things were not good was whenever man was alone. The world is designed for there to be male and female, and for them to go forth and to multiply. This world is to be filled with individuals as that process of procreation between male and female goes on. But whenever He set forth that unit, He established the family. The Lord in Matthew 19 spoke about, you know, in the beginning He made them male and female. And what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And you think about the value of that home. Those individuals who join into a marriage bond, it doesn't matter whether you're in a marriage bond, you're part of a family. But you look at that and you find that God speaks of the importance of it. Man ought not to put it asunder. And the sad thing is, it can be put asunder either by dividing when there shouldn't be a division, but also by destroying the very components of that first foundation, the home. Whenever you realize the value of the home, I think we have a better concept of it, but also a better appreciation of it. We see how precious it is and what the value is to every single aspect of our life. You know, what's wrong with the governments today? What's wrong with the leaders? Well, I can just about assure you that in the majority of cases it's because of their upbringing, what they received, what they instilled within them, and how they produce it in their lives. The fact is, if everybody acted like a Christian, we wouldn't have wars. But people don't. But what's wrong with society? People. What's wrong with the church whenever problems come in? People. Well, that takes you. What's wrong with the family? Nothing, if it follows God's plan. We look and see then the value of a godly home. Every individual has a part in that home, just like the physical body. Whenever part of my body doesn't function as it should, it is problematic. It hinders from doing the things that you desire, that you're initially designed for. The same thing with the family. God set it as a foundation to provide the ingredients for society, for the church collectively. And whenever we do not function as we should, problems come in those areas. And so you look and you think about then the value of the home, and that's what I wanted to do, you know, the foundation, you know, if that righteousness exalts a nation, well, that's true of every aspect of every part of our lives, but sin is a reproach. But that righteousness, a godly family, I want us to look and consider what we provide. You know, living a godly home isn't easy. Just as individually we make decisions, God said, you know, it's a narrow way that leads to eternal life. That's not just an individual thing, that's a family thing. We live in a family collectively. We're part of a family. There's nobody in here that's not part of a family. It could take a broader aspect, the family of God, but the physical family that you're a part of, you and I have a responsibility to it. Mother, father, child, brother, sister, doesn't make any difference. We are valuable whenever we're who we should be. And so you think about it, and I want us to look at about 5 things that God shows us that we're valuable in, what value we bring to the society, to the church as a whole. Now, if you look at the family and you think, okay, there's so much said about the family, where are you going to start? Well, I'm going to start and pretty well camp in the Ephesian letter in chapter 5, beginning in verse 22, and you go on down through chapter 6 and verse 4, you find God giving a very comprehensive aspect of the home. Doesn't give the totality of it, but he gives us a lot of information that helps us realize the value. You could look at one passage where whenever he tells them, you know, this is a mystery, I speak concerning Christ and the church. Whenever God compares a union between us as the church and Christ, and he says the comparison I make there is the home itself. Well, that tells you it's mighty important. It's of value with nothing else said. But whenever we look at what is provided, whenever we apply the things in Ephesians 5 and 6, you find what we can really be. We can be part of the solution. Sadly, not everybody's going to take it, but we have the ability to provide it, to give the opportunity. And so you look and you find, first of all, if you look back to the book of Ephesians, the 5th chapter, you find that what you have is a respect for authority. The very first thing, whenever you look to Ephesians 5 and you say, I want to know what it says, you've already got that spark of desire, that goal for authority, because you're looking and saying, it's not just me. What does God say? Because he is the ultimate authority. He is the one who is in charge of all things, whether we like it or not, whether we obey it or not. He is the one who is in charge. He is God. And so whenever you open your Bibles and you look and you say, okay, I want to see what it says, you have that concern for authority that has to grow, has to be applied to every aspect of our lives. You look in verse 22 of Ephesians 5, actually in verse 21, he said, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. There's the reverence for God, the respect for God. And then he says, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. The husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be unto their own husbands in everything. You look at that, and of course, first of all, you see, okay, I want to look in the Bible. What does God say? First thing you notice is that whenever he looks at the relationship within the home, and it continues over into chapter 6 even, in verse 1 through 3, where you bring up children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, what your focus in the family is God. He's the one in charge. Again, we're looking, what does he say? Whenever I, through the years, have talked to people about problems within their home, I say, first of all, well, we can look and see what God says. But I've had people through the years, not very many, but there have been some, well, we need counseling. We don't want to look at the Bible. And I say, well, I can't help you. Because the greatest counselor ever is God himself. And if that is not the solution in here, you may go to a counselor, not opposed to counselors in the world, if they apply the principles that are in God's Word. A lot of them will contradict those, say, well, you can't do that. Religion causes a problem. No, religion, God's way, provides a solution. So you look and you see, in here you put God first. But there is that respect for authority that is bound up within it. You look and you see the relationship to one another is in the fear of God. That is the authority. The relationship between wife and husband, submit yourselves unto your own husbands. Oh, that won't work. No, in my home, husband's not the head. Well, I got news for you. You got a problem. You're already out of step with what God said the home is. And it's going to cause problems, because if you reject that initially, what else are you going to reject whenever it doesn't seem comfortable or what you like? Well, the opposite side of that too isn't just the wives. Many wives struggle because the husband says, "Oh, I don't want to be the head. I'll just go to work. I don't want to deal with anything else." Well, you've already dealt with the idea that you're going to fail God and you're going to fail your family. Because you're not instilling there, you're not bringing about the foundation of authority within the home itself. But that is an idea that we look. There is authority. There has to be a realm, an order of authority. In Bible class this morning, you find Justin was talking about in the book of Titus, appoint elders in every church. And discussion was on, why a plurality of elders and why elders and such as that. Well, it came down to you can have chaos or you can have order. God's not the author of confusion. If my home cannot figure out, number one, that God is head, number two, if there is a husband there, he is to be the head of the home. Secondly, thirdly, if there is a wife, she is to be submissive unto the husband. Now, does that mean she doesn't have any input? No. We've discussed that over and over and over. The man who would not look and concern himself with his wife, the very next point is going to deal with that, but the idea that he's going to just lord it over her, that's a failure of a proper regard for proper authority. God's the only one who has the ability, the right to say, this is it, and that's no changing from it. I have the right to say it in any realm. If I'm going to follow God, things out of kilter with what he says, no, that's not there. We're not going to do that. Like Joshua, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Well, that's the decision he made. You're going to be part of my house, we're going to do that. And so you look, and the respect for authority is there. But it's brought down, as we said, in Ephesians 6. You bring up your children and nurture and admonish the Lord. You tell them, we've got to do what God says. We've got to live the way that God says. And by the way, in this home, I, as a husband, I'm not going to take charge. I'm not going to take responsibility. And the wife, no, I'm not going to submit to that man. What is that child learning? You nurture them, bring them up and nurture and admonish the Lord, as long as it's comfortable, as long as you like it. If you don't like it, forget it. Well, that's going to carry over. There's a lot of laws. There's been a lot of discussion, in this area about the property taxes. Well, I can guarantee you, Lana and I, we don't like to pay property taxes, whether it be on our house, whether it be on our personal belongings. I don't like to pay taxes on the food I buy or the gas I buy. But you know what? I'm going to do it. There's nothing that God says that's opposed to that. As a matter of fact, he says, render unto Caesar, that's which is Caesar's. So I look and I have that authority that begins in the home and it carries over into other areas of my life. Why is this world in such chaos? The other day I looked, there was something went on out at a carnival out here. What happened? Well, a bunch of young people got out there and they decided they'd do what they want. They'd fight. They'd do this. They'd do that. Police came in. They'd fight against them. What happened? I'd venture to say that in 99% of the cases, there was a failure of authority within the home itself. Whether it be the relationship or whether it be the instilling, the goal that you're going to follow God's law. You're not going to act like that. Romans 13, we are to be obedient to the powers that be. Well, if I don't have that instilled within the home, that we're obedient to the power that is, but I don't see it instilled within the home and the husband-wife relationship, the parent-child relationship, the parent who says, well, I can't do anything with this kid. Well, I guarantee you I could. But the fact is, if I don't have it there, why not do that out in society? A man the other day, Kenny, called me and asked me if I had my old GMC out, and I said, no, why? And he said, well, somebody was stopped going down the highway doing 140-something miles an hour. Well, that obviously was a joke because the 40 miles an hour my truck is struggling to do. But the reality is, why is somebody driving 140 miles an hour down the street? Somewhere there's a breakdown in authority. You look at that in the home, whenever it is guided by God's word, God is the head. There's a respect for that authority. And then that's applied to the home itself and all those relationships, then it carries over. There's going to be that is instilled within me, you, a respect for authority within the church, for authority within society, and it makes for order. Not everybody's going to do it, but I'm going to be, and I'm going to strive to bring up children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who are part of the solution, not the problem. But then secondly, the care and love for others is set forth as a beautiful and wonderful foundation. You know, we live in a world which is described largely by the Apostle Paul in Philippians, the 2nd chapter, verse 19 and following. He said, I'm going to send Timotheus unto you. Why? Because I have no man who will just naturally look upon the things of others. Every man looks upon himself. In other words, your life's not my problem. You got yourself into that mess. Don't worry about it. I'm going to do what I want. If it hurts you, it doesn't matter. It's all about self. But God points out in Ephesians 5, notice in this home, in verse 25, husbands, love your wives. What kind of love is that? Well, I love you, dear. By the way, you just get on your own here. It's time for me to do this, do that, do that. You know, you live your life, I'll live mine. But he says you love your wives as Christ loved the church. What's the pinnacle of Christ's love for the church? He gave himself for it. You know, Christ was the ultimate example of love, care. He loved us enough to give himself. You see, that love and care is something that carries on in every aspect of life. I look, and if you look through in verse 25 and even back into verse 21, submitting yourselves to one another in the fear of God, you find in verse 25 and following there in verse 26, he says he's going to sanctify and cleanse it. You know, this care and love, Jesus looked. Why did he die? So that I could be better. You see, I was in sin. You were in sin. Romans the 5th chapter, whenever I was without strength, you know, we sing that song. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore. Very deeply sinking to rise no more. What happened? Love lifted me. What does that mean? Jesus died, looked at me and you as sinners, and said, I want to make you better. I want to make you who you should be, and the only way that's going to happen is through my sacrifice, through the love that I will give. So that care and love is brought forth to make us better. Ephesians, the 6th chapter, you bring up children in nurture and admonition of the Lord. You tell them to have respect for authority. Why? Because that's the first commandment with promise. You see, in a godly home, whenever that love is given, whenever that care is given, it's seeking the best for that child. It isn't saying, you know, I'm your dad, I'm going to do what I want, and you're going to do what I say no matter what. No. The love that is there shows that child, shows that spouse, husband, wife. The love that is there shows the way I'm talking, the way I'm doing things, the decisions I want us to make, whatever it may be, are for the good. Young people, you follow God's will if it's taught in your family, you likely live a lot longer and a lot better. That's what Ephesians 6 is saying. But it's the care and love that is there. But then you get to the sacrifice. I've already mentioned that. What does this love do? It sacrifices self for others. In verse 25, he gave himself. Well, you know, people say, would you die for your wife? You better believe it. Would you die for your children? You better believe it. But the fact is, I can't have the result that Jesus did, but I'm going to give the opportunity. I hope I never have to make that choice to die for somebody, but I hope that I would be willing to have that depth of love that's going to sacrifice and do everything I can. And that's what God puts forth, that sacrifice that is there. It brings about, whenever you see that sacrifice, you know, it's like, Lana, I've told you this before, I'll get, you know, on a little pity party. I'll say, well, you know, this is going, and, you know, they won't do this person, I tried to talk to them. And she just looks and says, you been nailed to the cross? I said, let me have my pity party for a second, babe. But the reality is she brings it back. We sacrifice whenever we show the depth of love that God talks about. It seeks the best for another. That's what the definition of this love is. But it isn't at no cost. I'm willing to pay the price. You know, taking your role in the family, it's a sacrifice. You know, I think about whenever I was growing up, my parents would tell me, you know, here's the way things are going to be done. I knew good and well. I knew better than they did. They didn't understand what I was going through. They didn't know what I was facing. They didn't know the best solutions. I dealt with these people. Well, I found out later they did. But if I sacrificed my will to do the good for them, the right thing, turns out good if it's God's way. So you look and you think about the sacrifice. It comes down the idea, you know, bring them up in nurture and admonition. Don't forget that last phrase of the Lord. That you're teaching young ones. Whenever a discussion goes on between husband and wife, if it gets to be a serious point, you know, and this is the way it's going to be, it's because the Lord's will is at stake. Whenever the wife says, you know, Jack, come on, let's not do that. Ultimately, the decision that's going to make a big difference is, what would God want? You see, whenever I speak about the idea of sacrifice, it may be in relationships roundabout. I can remember a time whenever I went to my dad and I told him, you know, well, I'm supposed to do this and everything for them and everything. I don't want to do this and this and this. And he looked at me, he said, son, it's not all about you. Well, I was kind of taken aback because I thought it was at that point. But then I realized it wasn't. You know, I'm part of this society. I'm part of the church. I'm part of the family. And you know, sometimes it takes sacrifice. Oh, you don't give up on God, but the things that are able to be changed, give up on them. It's like that old saying, you know, is this the hill you want to die on? Is it that important, in other words? Well, if it's a personal sacrifice, I need to be willing and ready to make that. I need to be looking at the idea that, yeah, I can give up. You know, it may not be exactly what I want, but I'm willing to sacrifice. And I don't say it, you know, okay, I'm going to sacrifice or you're good. So that it'll come back as a pity thing on me, but I just deal with the matters, go on, and labor for peace, labor to be together, to have that love, that care, that seeks the best for others, and I may not know all the answers. But then I also look and I think about the foundation of commitment. You go over to Ephesians 5, in verse 31, he says, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. The Lord referred to that in Matthew 19 and verse 6. He said, you know, what God had joined together, let that man put asunder. But you look at that phrase in there, leave father and mother. You know, I've been blessed with grandchildren, children. Some of the children were by birth. Some married in, are still my children. Same thing with the grandchildren. And now I've got great-grandchildren. And one of the hard things to deal with is, again, it's not all about me, because they have a commitment there. You know, I can look at my newest little great-grandchild, and I can take her, and she'll just smile. She'll grin, and I grab her. She'll see her mama, and she cries. I thought, okay. And that's not going to change. There's that tie that's there. You think about that phrase, leave father and mother. That is the union that you had. And to think that you're going to have a commitment that is going to cause you to leave that. You don't stop loving father and mother, but your commitment now is changing. And so You're joined together. He says, you shall be joined unto his wife. And there he shall be one flesh. There is a union there, a commitment that is so strong that Jesus, there's only one case in which that ought to be divided, and then, if possible, not to do it then, but if fornication comes in. But he says, short of that, you stick it out. You live that way. Now, there are things that come. You know, if I beat my wife, she going to stay with me? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, she'd tell me, you got to go to sleep sometime, which would be a problem. But the thing is, no, she's not going to live in a situation like that. But it's because I have failed to live as God would. Does she have the right to remarry? No. But you look, and number one, if I have this respect for authority, this care and love, this sacrificial attitude, whenever I marry her, I'd never treat her that way. I'd never do that. So the commitment can stay. But whenever you see in a home, you know, I grew up in a home, my mother, my father, they had a strong respect for that marriage bond. Lana, the same way. And so whenever we grew up, we saw it and really realized what commitment was. And if we have the home we should, then our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren are going to look and say, well, you know, man, I don't know how Ami could stay with Pop-Pop. That guy really... Well, the reason is commitment. You know, you learn to live with, to be sacrificial, to have that proper care and love, to respect the authority of God, and you maintain that commitment. You're one. The oneness that supersedes the oneness you had as a child growing up with mother and father. That commitment is so strong. Now, if you don't have that, what's going to happen? Well, if you don't have that commitment, you look within the church. You have commitment within the family, Lana and I, and our children, our grandchildren, your family. You have a commitment together. And so you stay together. Hard times come? Yeah. But you're committed. You're going to stay together. You're going to have that sacrifice. You're going to have that love. You're going to have that respect for authority. And you're going to work things out. You're going to stay there. What happens in the church whenever that authority, whenever that care and love, whenever that sacrifice, whenever that commitment is not brought down to a congregational level? You have all sorts of problems. Well, I'm just going to leave. I don't like what Jack said. Well, did you talk to Jack? No. Well, okay. But the idea is there's a commitment. So I am going to go talk to Jack. I am going to talk to Elder. I am going to talk to my brother or sister. Why? Because this is so important. This is the value. I learned it in my home. This is my home of brothers and sisters. I look and I see the family here that I'm a part of. You think it's a simple thing or just a sideline that Titus was told about the relationship of younger and older? And Timothy, 1 Timothy 5, same thing. And that it was, you entreat the older as fathers, the youngers, they'd be considered children then, mothers, children. You think it's an accident that we're called brethren? That's not a title. That's a relationship. You think it's just a little sideline, doesn't mean anything? That I have sisters here? No. It's more than a title. It's a relationship. You think about back in the book of Genesis, the 13th chapter, whenever between Abraham and Lot, a problem arose. The answer that Abraham gave says, we be brethren. I mean, that's the basis of our relationship. And whenever you have that, what you learn as a family, if it's a godly family, is carried over into every relationship you have in that spiritual realm. And so the value of it is so amazing, that commitment that is there. So I treat individuals special. You know, my wife is special. My children special. There's a commitment that's there. Well, I got news for you. You're special to me. You're my brothers and sisters. Some of you, older than me, ought to entreat you as a mother or father. Younger, ought to entreat you as a mother or a father myself regarding you. But that relationship, that commitment is there because we are family. And I learned it in the home. But then the moral uprightness. You look and you find in Ephesians 5 and verse 21, submitting yourselves unto one another in the fear of God. I mean, that is the overriding thing, not a fear like, oh no, but a fear, a reverence, looking the God who spoke this world into existence, the God who is the sustainer, the God who loved me and gave his Son, that divine child, to be the Lord of lords and King of kings in my life. He's given instruction. What am I going to do with it? The Spirit guided these individuals into all truth. And whenever I submit myself unto one another as unto the Lord, that's predicated upon the very fact that my life is patterned by what God said. And so whenever there are moral choices there, whenever I look, and what's my choice? Well, I can just do worldly things? No. 1 John 2. I'm not going to love the world. That may have been something that crept into my life sometime. But I'm not going to do it anymore. Because the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, these things aren't of the Father. Well, what's that got to do with it? Well, I have this fear of God. I have this reverence. I have this submission to Christ. Everything about my life is patterned after what God would have me do. It's a Christ-centered home. The old phrase that used to be used years ago, I guess it's still used, what would Jesus do? WWJD. The thing is, he'd want you and I to do what he says. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, the one who has all power in heaven and earth. He said, teach them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. And he knew that wasn't going to be easy because sometimes terrible things happen and you want to reach out and you want to just do things that aren't right. You don't do them. You don't render evil for evil. You don't give in to the lust of the flesh. Everybody's tempted. But I choose, like James said, not to allow that to conceive, because then sin's going to come forth. But all of these are there because I learned in the home that, what mom and dad says, that's it. What the husband says, ultimately, that's it. He's the head. Why? Because God is supreme. And so whenever I face the choices, it's not a difficult thing for me to prove all things. Hold fast to that which is good. What's good? What God said. And abstain the things that have the appearance of evil. I don't want them. I'm not going to do them. Is that hard? Yeah. But the idea is, I've already learned the idea of commitment and sacrifice. And so that's not there. And God loved me, so I love him. So I have this love, and I want to do the best thing for him, to him. And I have that respect for his authority. So my moral choices. I talked about people that, they get out and they get in a fight and they start shooting each other. I mean, just every day you hear about this. Or somebody over here and they turn to drugs. They turn to this. They turn to every act of immorality. Let's do this because we love each other. No. My moral decisions are higher than that. And it's the foundation that ought to be in our homes. So I look and I see this moral uprightness. You ever heard that phrase, children learn what they live? There's a long poem about it, if they live with the criticisms, they live with this, here's the result. But if you want to see that, look around. What have my children learned? What have my grandchildren learned? You think about the idea that children learn what they live. That's true of everything in the family to a degree. I know that My wife has talked about times, at school she'd see children just get out of hand, start cussing people and doing this and doing all sorts of things, and so they call the parents in and they find out why the child act that way, because they come in the same way. Where'd you learn to do that? Well, if it's ungodly, maybe you learned it in the home. Maybe not. But then you need to be like the prodigal and come to the point that you realize that's destroying life. But there's a better way that you knew was there in the home. You look and you find that we can have that opportunity to have a home that God says it's going to be a blessing to every member in it. It's going to be a blessing to the society in which they live, and it's going to be a blessing to the church of which they're a part, because it's founded on the values that God gives. So I look at the church, I look at the world, and then I take a long look at my home. What am I doing to be of value? Am I making the world a better place? I tell my kids that, my grandkids that. Matter of fact, I got a little mug that has that on it that one of my granddaughters gave me. You make a difference, you do something good. I mean, these are the things that make us who God wants us to be. But the choice we have is whether I'm going to be that way. But it doesn't come from going to church a few hours a week. It comes from being that person, that family that God describes in Ephesians 5 and 6. What foundation are we laying? What foundation you want to lay? Word's still there. It's going to be there till the end of the world. So it'll be there till the end of my life. I need to make the choice that I'm going to follow it. If I haven't been, I need to come back to it. It begins again, as we've said over and over, with a relationship with God. A child of God is going to look to Him as a father, going to do His will. So you make that choice today. His will is that if you want to be His child, you're baptized into Christ. That's a message in Acts 2, Acts 22, Acts 8, over and over and over, that the way of being a part of the family of God is to be His child, and He has given the instructions. Do I have respect for that authority? I can make that decision. And then will I live with a continued respect for that authority and everything that follows it? It's my choice as I stand and sing the song of invitation.